All human beings are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain rights which are inalienable, and they also include the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, leaving the decision of their intention to God. The good people of the American colonies, by authority, declare that these united colonies are independent and sovereign states, and all allegiance to the Crown of Great Britain and all political ties with it are renounced. These historical words are the Declaration of Independence of the USA. This declaration containing these words was issued on July 4, 1776, at Independence Hall in Philadelphia. The Declaration was drafted by a committee including Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Benjamin Franklin, and signed by 53 men of the 13 USA colonies. The Declaration sped the war that started with a tragedy on a cold evening. Then, a painting was created that made the fragmented American colonies into one nation. What happened that cold evening, and what was the story of this painting? In Truthline, Documentary's History of America, Episode 8, will show you all this. It's about March 1777 when snow was falling intermittently in Boston, the city of Massachusetts state. People's feelings were very warm in this cold snowfall, because the red-dressed British soldiers in the city, known as the Redcoats because of their clothing, had come on a mission. These Redcoats came to force taxes from the Americans because the people in the American colonies refused to pay taxes. The reason was that people throughout America, including Boston, were angry that Britain was taxing them but did not give them representation in the UK Parliament. They believed that Britain was actually robbing them. Therefore, Boston merchants started smuggling to avoid taxes. The people in the city had put up posters to boycott British products. People were so angry that they burned official documents of Great Britain, meaning issued papers, official and legal papers, because they were also taxed. So there was an atmosphere of mob violence in the city. People had come to the extent of beating the sellers of British products. So the British authorities, in order to control the 16,000 populated city of Boston, called some 4,000 Redcoats. So the Redcoats had to crack down hard on tax evaders and the brawlers. On the other hand, the citizens also did not give a good welcome to these Redcoats. So wherever they got a chance, they would shout at the Redcoats and create a ruckus and vent as much anger as they could on them. On the evening of March 5th, some angry Americans found a lonely Redcoat. This lone British soldier was stationed outside the customs house. The Americans started abusing him and pelting him with snowballs. Just as this was going on, 8 more Redcoats rushed to help him. The sight of more Redcoats sent the already angry crowd into a frenzy. They started challenging the Redcoats that if you have courage, shoot at them. Then suddenly a sound of fire echoed with a whiz. Why? How? Who fired this shot? To this day, no one knows. It seems that this shot was fired by one of the Redcoats, and its target was the American crowd. After the first shot, the guns of the rest of the Redcoats also opened their mouths. Within moments, 5 Americans were lying dead on the ground while 6 were nursing their wounds. Now this mishap was just a tragedy which happened at the instigation of the crowd. But this tragedy was immortalized by a painting. The painting was created by Boston artist Henry Pelham and depicts British soldiers firing on unarmed Americans. This painting somehow fell into the hands of a freedom fighter, Paul Revere. He designed this painting on wood, made copies of it, and spread them around. On his copies was written, "Bloody Massacre." So the painting and news of this Boston tragedy appeared in American dailies and spread throughout the American colonies. This painting gave the formerly divided American colonies a common cause of resistance to Britain, and thus the American colonies began to coalesce into one nation. On the other hand, the British started trying hard to appease the angry Americans. Soldiers who fired on innocent civilians in Boston were arrested and tried. Interestingly, These soldiers were defended by the American lawyer John Adams, who later fought for freedom against Britain and became the U.S. president. John Adams proved these soldiers innocent in court and released them. After this trial, the British abolished all taxes on American colonies except for tea. But Americans continued to boycott British products, and the damage came to a company on which its mark was deep in history. This company was the East India Company. The East India Company, which was busy gradually occupying India in those days, also exported tea to the American colonies. But when the tea was taxed, the Americans boycotted the company's tea and started drinking tea smuggled from Dutch companies. Because of this smuggling, the East India Company's tea exports stopped and tons of tea leaves started rotting in its warehouses. The British Parliament, to drive the East India Company away from losses, passed the Tea Act in 1773. Under this act, the full rights to sell tea in the American colonies were given to only one company, the East India Company. Additional tax levied on the company in the UK was also waived. The Americans who were buying tea from this company for selling to the colonies did not get the waiver of tax from Britain. So again, its reaction was intense and immediate. Boston merchants formed a secret organization called the Sons of Liberty. On the night of December 16, 1773, dozens of members of this organization boarded 3 ships docked at Boston Harbor. These ships were loaded with East India Company tea. The attackers were dressed like Native Americans and were carrying the famous Native American axes known as tomahawks. So, with the same axes, they tore open 248 boxes of tea, and from them 45 tons of tea, valued at $1 million in today's currency, were drowned in the sea. This event is remembered in history as the Boston Tea Party, which meant a tea party held in Boston. In response to it, the British government closed the port of Boston to trade and imposed more stringent laws in America. Britain wanted to recover the cost of this tea from the Americans, but it could not. Rather, an incident took place 3 months later. In March 1774, once again, the citizens of Boston attacked a ship and threw 30 boxes full of tea into the water. When the news of this new incident spread to the other American colonies, Maryland, New York, and South Carolina also picked up this idea. They also got on the ships of the East India Company and disposed of tea into the sea. Now the whole of America was becoming united against Great Britain. A wave of revolution and freedom had begun, but it needed political leadership, which it got from the Congress, which had representatives of all the 13 American colonies. These 2 buildings, close to each other, are in the American city of Philadelphia. These closely located buildings are very valuable historically. The first building is Carpenter's Hall and the second is Independence Hall. When America was on the way to independence, the representatives of its colonies would gather in these 2 buildings to discuss the situation. This joint meeting of all the colonies was called the Continental Congress. The first session of this Congress was held on September 5, 1774, at Carpenter's Hall. The Congress made a regular parliament for the American colonies and led the revolutionary movement in an organized manner. George Washington from Virginia also participated in its first session. Then, Congress issued a declaration or communique to demand full independence from Great Britain, not just autonomy, and it was decided to continue the boycott of UK trade till demands were met. The most important announcement was that against Britain, the American militia would be recruited, which meant armed forces. So, soon recruitment and training of militia started in many areas of America. It wasn't long after the first session of Congress that the war drums sounded and the historic American Revolutionary War began, and its most important and the first front was Boston. Congress had started recruiting American militia, but in the eyes of the British, it was a rebellion. Recruiting a private army was an illegal act for them. So the British Army started operations against the American militia. They started raiding militia bases and confiscating weapons. For one such operation, the British Army received information that the militia had set up an arms depot in Concord, a town near Boston. So 700 British soldiers were sent from Boston to raid this arms depot. But the Boston rebel Paul Revere, spreader of the Bloody Massacre painting, rode up to the militia in the middle of the night and warned them of a British attack. The American militia immediately planned to stop British troops near Concord at the town of Lexington, while the rest would take out weapons from the depot. In the morning, when the Redcoats passed through Lexington to Concord, they were stopped by 77 American militiamen. A British major yelled orders to the American militiamen, "O rebels, lay down the weapons." But the militia opened fire in response. British soldiers opened fire and killed 8 militiamen while 7 were injured. The rest of them ran away, but only one Redcoat was slightly injured. After winning this clash, the Redcoats reached Concord town in high confidence. But it was too late. As per their plan, the militiamen had taken their weapons from the arms depot. In desperation, the Redcoats set the empty depot on fire. But when they turned back to Boston, another surprise was in store for them. 3,500 men of the American militia had surrounded them. These men started firing at the British Army on the Redcoats from all sides. The British troops retreated towards Boston in chaos. Till they reached the city, bullets rained on them, and there, bodies continued to fall. When the British soldiers reached Boston, 250 of them had been killed or wounded. In contrast, only 90 American militiamen were killed or wounded. The militia were so emboldened by this battle that they besieged Boston. When the news of this battle reached Philadelphia, the Congress leaders understood a regular war with Britain had started, and it needed an experienced commander to fight it. And this commander was present on their flank. George Washington, who hailed from Virginia, used to attend Congress as a representative of his state. Congressmen knew George Washington was a colonel in the British Army. He also had experience fighting the French and the Native Americans. So on June 19, 1775, Congress made Washington the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. It is said that George Washington was a bit nervous when he got this position. When he was announced as commander-in-chief, he ran out of the room. But after a while, however, he regained his composure and recovered. This commander-in-chief was to chase the British Army towards Boston. George Washington's first mission was to liberate the American city of Boston. So he left for his first target in June 1775. On July 3rd, George Washington took command of the U.S. forces in Cambridge. He then made a thorough survey of the battlefield around Boston. He realized that the British had a much stronger position than him in Boston, as they had heavy cannons and was supported by British Navy ships in the harbor. To conquer Boston, cannons on a high point near the city were needed so that the Americans could target the city and the British ships in the harbor. 2 such locations existed on either side of Boston. One of them was where these 2 hills were, Bunker Hill and Breed's Hill, while the other place was Dorchester Heights. But Bunker Hill and Breed's Hill were already occupied by the British. It was quite difficult to get this place back from them because the British had the high ground, while Dorchester Heights was almost impossible to reach without being seen by the British. George Washington didn't have the heavy artillery to attack the city at that time. Therefore, attacking Dorchester Heights was still futile in his eyes. That is, occupying these heights did not make any sense. It was not possible. Thus, apparently, the position of the Americans was weak in Boston. But before George Washington arrived, the U.S. forces had blocked all land routes to Boston and surrounded the British. The number of Americans was also very high. Therefore, Washington also preferred to continue the siege and continued to bombard Boston and the British forces with light cannons. Along with this, there were skirmishes between the 2 armies. Many months passed in this battle, and January 1776 began. This month, George Washington received such help that the stalemate at the Battle of Boston was broken. In fact, when this siege was going on, the American army was also fighting the British forces on many other fronts. So in January 1776, American soldiers from other such fronts started sending arms seized from the British army to Boston. 50 cannons were also dragged to Boston with the help of oxen on the snowy roads. This was a great help that George Washington received. On the night of March 14th, George Washington performed a heroic act. He took the British by surprise and, in an incredible move, moved the cannons to Dorchester Heights, another high point near the city, and entrenched his position here before the British could react. It was now a place from which both the small British force and the warships could be easily targeted. The British got hopeless about Boston's defense in a changed scene the next morning. On the 17th of March, the British Army left the city in ships after the defeat, and it was the American Army's first decisive victory in the War of Independence. The American flag started flying over Boston. The loss of Boston meant losing one of Britain's most important ports, so they now decided to attack the other important port of New York to make it their supply line and crush the rebellion. George Washington was also a warlike commander. He was understanding the next move of the British. So he took over the defense of New York with an army of 20,000. As George Washington reached New York, a development took place in Philadelphia. This revolutionary development was America's Declaration of Independence. That is, the United States, going ahead of autonomy, declared independence. On July 4, 1776, the Congress declared independence in Philadelphia. And in America, Independence Day is celebrated on this same date. However, George Washington could not sign this revolutionary document. A month after the Declaration of Independence, in late August, more than 30,000 British troops attacked New York. A fleet of 400 ships of the British Navy, equipped with heavy guns, took part in this battle and was shelling the Americans with their powerful guns. The huge firepower of the British Navy and Army overwhelmed the Americans soon. By September 15th, the British captured New York City, New York State. The capture took place, but George Washington retreated at the right time to save his army from encirclement and also save the lives of a large number of their soldiers. Now, the British had a chance to launch a major attack and crush the American rebellion once and for all. This attack was planned by the British from the Canadian side because the British forces here were very strong. And this first attack from Canada was to be done on the state of New York because the capital of this state, New York City, was under the control of the British. However, the rest of the state was occupied by the Americans. The plan of the British was to capture the rest of New York State and restore the land connection with New York City, because New York City was a peninsula, as the map shows. The second advantage to the British was the division of American states into two, which had to give the British a strong military benefit. So according to this plan, in June 1777, British General John Burgoyne attacked the state of New York with 9,000 soldiers. His target was the city of Albany, New York, and the capture of the city meant that the British Army would soon regain land links with New York City and cut off all of New England from the rest of the U.S., putting it back into British control. New England was the hub of the American War of Independence. Boston, where the fight for freedom began, was also in New England. The capture of New England meant the end of the American Revolutionary War. Defeating General Burgoyne became a matter of life and death for the Americans. So thousands of American soldiers reached this front. Here, they spread out into the jungle and started fighting in guerrilla style. American snipers took cover behind trees and began to escape after targeting the British officers and their native guides. In this battle, the British lost so many lives that they lost spirit when they reached Saratoga, 40 to 50 kilometers away from Albany. The British took refuge in an agricultural farm in Saratoga and took a defensive position by putting up fences around it. But here the Americans started to get an edge as they surrounded the British soldiers who had taken a defensive position. About 20,000 Americans surrounded them near Saratoga. Now they began attacks on the British. The British did their best to break the circle of the Americans but failed. Tired and exhausted, General Burgoyne on October 17, 1777, with 5,000 British troops, surrendered before American General Gates. The defeat of the British was a turning point in America's War of Independence. Impressed by the U.S. success, France, Spain, and the Netherlands, enemies of Britain as they had been defeated by it in the past, also waged a war against Britain. They fought the British Army inside and outside the United States. Along with this, their experienced soldiers also helped the American Army. They helped Washington and his army in Valley Forge, where they were in the winter. In the winter of 1777, George Washington with 10,000 troops came to Valley Forge in the U.S. state of Pennsylvania for rest, because war was not possible in snowfall. But when it started snowing, life here became miserable for his army. 2,500 American soldiers died from cold, hunger, and disease. But despite all, the Americans at Valley Forge also received great help. Here the French general Marquis de Lafayette and a former German military officer, Steuben, trained them to international standards. So at the end of winter, the American army fighting hunger and disease here turned out to be a formidable modern fighting force. After that, for the next 4 years, the war had ups and downs. George Washington attempted to encircle a large British army in the same way General Burgoyne's army in Saratoga had been encircled by American forces. And then, in September 1781, the English commander, General Lord Cornwallis, was surrounded. At Yorktown, Virginia, he had more than 7,000 British troops and a large number of weapons. He was the same Lord Cornwallis who came to India and fought Tipu Sultan and inflicted on him his first defeat. So in 1781, Lord Cornwallis was trapped in Yorktown. George Washington, with more than 20,000 American and French troops, encircled Yorktown and began bombarding it. General Cornwallis had only one way of escape, and that was by sea, because it was from here that the ships of the British Navy could come to his aid. But on September 5th, the French naval force defeated the British near Yorktown and cut this supply line. The American army also heavily attacked the British positions outside Yorktown. Within days, Lord Cornwallis was disappointed. On October 17th, Lord Cornwallis messaged George Washington for surrender. The formal surrender ceremony was held 2 days later. On October 19th, Cornwallis did not come and sent his subordinate, General Charles O'Hara, with his sword to meet the formalities of surrender. When the formality of the surrender was completed, it was declared that Americans had decisively won against the British, so there was no check to their freedom. After the defeat of Yorktown, the British gave up war and adopted negotiations. In 1782, negotiations began in France, in which Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and John Jay represented the U.S. Congress. Britain initially wanted to end the war without granting independence to America or accepting its Declaration of Independence. Americans were not ready to end the war unless their independence was accepted. But after months of long negotiations, the Americans won, and Britain agreed to recognize America's independence. On September 3, 1783, the historic treaty was signed in Paris, under which America became an independent country. The most important point of this agreement was that the territories which Britain had taken from France in 1763 were also handed over to the United States by Britain. They included land in present-day Ohio, Michigan, and several other states. Apart from these territories to the USA, the British also returned Florida to Spain. Thus, the son of the British Empire, set in the United States of America forever. After the Treaty of Paris, the British also evacuated New York City. On November 25, 1783, Washington entered New York City as a victor. 4 years after the Paris Treaty, the U.S. Constitution was completed in 1787. Under the Constitution, the first U.S. presidential election was held in 1789, and George Washington, the hero of independence, was elected president. John Adams, who saved the British soldiers involved in the Boston Massacre, became the first vice president of the United States. The America that George Washington found was almost half of today's America. So how did the U.S. become a vast country of 50 states? Why was America at war with Great Britain even after its independence? What happened to the millions of Native Americans living in America? Is America a stolen country? All of this will be shown to you in the next episode of History of America. If you haven't watched History of America previous episode yet, click on this playlist to watch all its episodes together.